What's up, everyone? I am Michael Burns, the host over at Wisecrack. Today, I'm sitting down with Yellow Dot's managing director and executive producer, Staci Roberts-Steele. Staci, thank you for being here today.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, so hopefully everyone caught the video leading into this. If you didn't, we'll have a link in the description. You can check it out later. But we kind of landed on this question of, broadly speaking, what can we do to address climate change? But I guess more specifically, when we think about the fact that we know that oil companies are fighting against the sort of work that you all do, the sort of work that activists do. They're actively producing media that's essentially propaganda for their industries. Mm-hmm. And to make things even worse, we know that a lot of those same corporations have interest overlap with political and business leaders. You know, how can we still find something to do? Mm-hmm. Or, you know, when we're feeling like, where is there hope for us to act within that? What can we do, if anything?
Yes. Okay. Well, there's nothing we can do. So
thank you so much for being here.
No, there's lots we can do. I mean, the thing about it is that you have to think in a way of like the fossil fuel companies have put in so much misinformation that have made it where we all feel like everything's fine. Like everything is fine, right? Everything's good. It's very similar to what the, tobacco companies did. Mm-hmm. Like, hey, there was warnings and things. But before that, like people were just doing it and everything was fine, even though it seemed weird that you were putting like smoke into your lungs and stuff. Sorry if you smoke.
I do not, for the record.
Great. But yeah, so the biggest thing we can do, that is the easiest lift, is mainly just about awareness and talking about it. And it sounds so simple and something that might not have a big impact, but it actually does, because the more that you are speaking about with friends, talking about at work, talking about some of the anxiety you're feeling around that it's not 100 years away problem, it's a now problem. We're all slowly being affected by extreme heat and flooding and all. It's like it's actually hitting us. So the more that we're talking about it makes it where it is not a everything's fine problem, right? And so that's kind of the first step. And then also just in terms of, we are as humans, like we are behavioral creatures. We learn from watching other people. Just the things that you're actually doing. If I look and my neighbor has solar panels on their home, I'm like, oh, that's interesting. I'm going to ask them about it. Or I see that they drive to work every day in an electric car. I'm like, oh, okay, that's normal now. So I think that's a big piece of it. And then also just the idea of protesting. Like you think of it sometimes as like, oh, that's some extreme thing that's happening. But the reality is, like in history, we've had these big mass movements have happened when it's 3.5% of the population engaging in nonviolent civil disobedience. And so if you think about it that way, that like majority of people now believe that climate change is happening and are worried about it, it's like something like 70%, and 100% of us are going to be affected by it. It's like, okay, we can get a few of us out there to like do that. And if you don't want to go to the streets, there are companies that you can give money to and they will help with that.
Yeah.
I
mean, it's interesting that, that idea that like we talk about it more, make it more part of the conversation. I wonder if sometimes it's an issue of climate change has gotten so like political. We now think of it as something that's a campaign issue or a protest issue, not a precondition for the existence of human life issue. And then I feel like by becoming a political issue, it's a thing where we don't talk about it.
Yeah.
And I've even I'm sure many of us have been in situations before where we're kind of told like, well, not here.
Yeah.
We're at a nice dinner party. Someone opened a Riesling. It's not time to talk about this. But, you're saying that maybe we push past that because I think in a sense, like it's not real. I mean, it is a political issue, but it's not just.
It's not just political. And it's become a political issue because that's what we love to do in America, at least. It's like we like put things on sides. But I think the scary thing about it is that we're all going to be getting hit more and more, you know what I mean, by all of this. Yeah. And so it's going to become something where it's not political. It's more just about like where you live and people are going to be migrating and moving and things like that. And so, I think I hear you of the like not talking about it because it feels like don't talk about religion and politics. Like it's in that sort of thing. But there's a part of it too where it's like, it's kind of, we all have different things that we're good at, right? Whether it's, public speaking or like you're a funny person or whatever it is. And I think it's also about like reframing how you think about talking about climate change. It doesn't mean you have to go to a dinner party and be like, we're all going to die and here are the reasons and stuff like that. But it is like, if at your job you're like, oh, I can create this group that is, that if people want to get more active, I can give that, like there's things you can do of just reframing your brain of like, how can I use like my voice as a human to be like, hey guys, we're in this together. It's going to get bad if we don't figure some stuff out,
Yeah. Well, I wonder then, in terms of like, there's been a lot of emphasis in recent years, I think, on very small scale things. Like many of us have suffered through the paper straw thing, which I think is starting to be kind of over now. You don't see as much paper straws anymore. No. But I even remember growing up, there was a thing, I think it was on Nickelodeon. They had like an Earth Week thing.
Yep.
And it put in my head at a very young age, you got to take a short shower.
Yeah.
Because if you don't, the planet's going to die.
Yeah, you're going to kill the planet.
And I think recently a lot of people, anytime you take a shower longer than 10 minutes, a penguin dies.
Yeah, exactly.
But I think a lot of people have become jaded on that, right? Especially if you grew up in the 90s and stuff. Like people did those things into the early 2000s. And I think there's been, there was the stat that came out a few years ago that like 70% of climate change is caused by this little group of corporations, which I think leaves people feeling what's the point? Why should I have to do a bunch of little annoying things if they don't matter?
Yep.
So what would you have to say to that issue? Like the question of what can we do on an individual level? What's worth doing on an individual level? And what's the value of those sorts of actions?
Well, one little piece to look at it is that the idea of your carbon footprint was created by BP. Like that was part of their game plan, right? Because they were just like, oh, let's make it. And even like Darren Woods, the CEO of Exxon, like recently came out and said something about like it's the individuals, it's their thing that we have to start doing. So they're definitely trying to put the blame on us. But you're right, it's like 100 companies that are really the cause of all of this. And so individual action, it's like, it is a minor thing. Like, I don't think recycling is going to save the world. It's not. But all that being said, kind of was saying earlier about the visibility and people seeing you do certain things. And because we are, as humans, like, if you have that urge to want to do something, you are going to feel better about it and then maybe do other things. And so I think there's the element of, like, if you can't afford it, like thinking about electric cars and solar and all that sort of stuff. But there's obviously a lot of people that's not in their game plan. There is, in terms of, if you look at food, for example, I'm from Iowa. I got a lot of meat eaters in my family and all that kind of stuff. So it's weird to say, become a vegan. And that's not at all what I would say. But I would say, try eating one plant-based meal a day because it makes a huge impact and it matters. There's a great organization, Support and Feed, that they kind of have this pledge and stuff, and you can do that. So that's like a piece of something to feel good. We also talk about food waste. The moment of like when you're thinking about going to the store to like the end point, which can be composting, there's like 7 moments in there where you can think about wasting less food because that's a huge part of emissions and stuff like that too. So those are all the things that are like, I'm going to feel good doing this thing, right? Like that I think is kind of what you're getting towards. But there's also like, I never thought about this until I started working more on climate, but like where your money goes, you have your money in a bank. Majority of banks are using your money to invest in fossil fuels. And so it's like, oh my gosh, like I never thought about that. And there's a website, Green Portfolio, where you can go on there and like connect your bank and it'll tell you like how bad your bank is and ones that are better and things like that. So even something that is, not something you have to think about every day. Like you switch all that over and you're suddenly at a different bank and you're like, oh, great. I'm not supporting this big bank who's putting all this money in fossil fuels. And then also it's, I think, joining organizations. And there are so many different levels of organizations. There are the ones where you're in the streets. There are the ones where it's more about meeting and talking about just being aware of what's going on and how things are changing. What laws are being passed and things like that. So there's a way that we have on our website, actually, at yellow.studios.com/act. There's all kinds of stuff on there. And we have lots of organizations of all different levels. And I think that's kind of the point, is that like, you don't have to be the stereotypical vegan protesting in the streets. You can. That's great.
We love those.
We love those people. But there's so many other levels of things. Even if you're just a rich person and you're funding the people going in the streets, like that's great too.
That's a great thing for rich. I think if anyone who's really rich is watching this, act when you're at the country club.
Yeah.
Talk about how much you love oil, but then send your money to those people.
Exactly. I mean, that'll just make you feel better about it.
Yeah. But no, a couple of things you say. I mean, I definitely think the joining up with organizations thing, obviously it's important, but it's important even in so much as it models the way in which like politics and change happens collectively. And so much of our existence these days is mediated via digital communication and our phones, and we're more and more just like atomized. And I do think that benefits them more than us to be that sort of atomized. And I think that even just getting together with people and realizing that other people are thinking about this, realizing that you can actually do stuff.
Yeah.
I think more and more we're forgetting that we have the power to do stuff. Like you said earlier, the power of like protest movements has done so much in this country at least.
Totally. Yeah. I mean, I guess I went to like the Women's March and stuff like that, but I went to the first Climate Week in New York last September. And I kind of had that thing. I was like, yep, we're going to the march. We're doing the thing we're supposed to do, you know. And then I was there and like in the streets with, I think it was like 50,000, 70,000 people, somewhere in there. And like, it was fun. It was like all these like-minded people. And then even people of like different groups where I was like, oh, I didn't know that or that sort of thing. And it's like, there is an aspect of community that is really fun and really exciting. And like knowing you're doing something good, but also like just being part of a group, you know?
Yeah. And I think it reminds you too that there's people, like you said, who maybe look like you and who don't look like you and who share your, you know, political ideology and you don't, that care about this thing.
Yeah.
The other thing you said about, you know, even the way we eat does make me think. So there's, in some of like the philosophers who are talking about climate stuff these days, there's this idea of degrowth, that, you know, our economy is so predicated on infinite growth and expansion that it's just untenable ecologically. And that we have to think about what does it mean to experience degrowth. And, you know, people like the guys who run the oil companies don't like that because it means there's not infinite profit. But it kind of helps us think about like, what would it look like to live like that? Yeah. And whether that means that we like drive a little bit less, eat a little bit less, meet, find a way to like have some collective gardens in our communities. Yep. Because I totally get why some people might look at that as a skeptical way to feel like you're doing something when Exxon gets to do whatever they want. But it's like, if we're going to have a world where this stuff doesn't destroy us, we're going to have to learn to live differently. Yeah. So it's like, why not get started? Maybe.
Yeah. I mean, I also think about like, I would much rather jump on a high-speed train, you know, to Vegas or whatever, rather than like drive to the airport, be there 2 hours early because they tell me to and I'm a rule follower, you know, like all the things. I think that it's like we also have to reframe our brains of like there is a better world. And like, I mean, you know, I don't want the oil companies to make more money, but like they should also realize like there's so much money in clean tech. Like, you know, like it's also like they should be shifting over faster than they are because there's so much more to be had by it. So it's one of those things where like you do have to envision things in a different way, but like I think realizing that it can be better. It doesn't have to be this dire future.
Yeah, like we can't underestimate the power of collective imagination. And if enough people realize like this better world doesn't just exist in our heads, it's very feasible.
It's very feasible.
Even like the high-speed rail thing, like there's kind of no reason.
There's no reason not to. I know.
We can't just have that.
And also, like if everyone starts biking, everyone's going to be hotter. Like, I mean, it's really going to help us if we...
Well, I think we both agree the end game of all of this is just a hotter society.
A hotter society. Like that's what we stand for, yes.
Yeah, so get a bike and get hot. Speaking of things that are hot, elections.
Yes.
We are entering, at least for those of us in the United States, an election season, one that I feel like people are not loving the vibe of thus far. We're not feeling super great. And I know that climate stuff is very much a ballot issue these days. Yep. It's become such a divisive thing as well, where one side kind of uses it to, if I was going to be really cynical, virtue signal. They're the good ones. Yeah. Another side uses it as a way to say that like we're not infected by the woke mind virus. Yeah. And I think it's another thing that can leave people, especially younger people, feeling a little cynical. Yep. And a little jaded. Mm-hmm. And so as we approach this election season, maybe what would you say to folks that do have that feeling, that are like, I do not want the planet to die. I want to make things better. I want to ride my bicycle and get hot, but I feel like this voting thing isn't doing
doesn't
much.
Matter.
Yeah, or like I don't trust these politicians anyways to do anything. So, you know, what do you say to those folks?
I mean, I would first say I totally get it. It's hard to trust politicians because a lot of them are bought by big oil. I mean, it's the way it is, same with guns and things like that. So it is hard to be like, okay, I'm going to get out of bed and go vote. But I think it's also, we focus so much on like the presidential election, like even saying like this year is the big thing, right? There's so many House and Senate races. There are so many more young people now running. real green climate candidates running, like people that actually like that is their number one mission and things like that. So I think it's about like getting more educated about, okay, wherever you live, like who is the green candidate? And most likely it's probably the person who's not in office right now. A lot of the times it is. And so I think it's looking at all that. It's also realizing that like some of this legislation that's been kind of brewing the last few years is actually working. Vermont just is the first state to pass a law that holds the oil companies accountable financially for climate disasters.
Whoa, shout out Vermont.
I know, and making it happen, which is really cool. And also, I mean, California has tons of there's a referendum right now about how close you can build to homes and things like that, things that you don't even think about, and so I think I mean, I hate to say it because it sounds like the cliche thing is like, get more educated before you vote, but there's lots of organizations on our website and other places where they can kind of break it down for you and tell you all of these things of just to get yourself understanding what's at stake in your state and locally, and that's like the best place to start.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, and then again, it's like the thing where we can get so, I think, distracted, especially by the media onslaught of the one election with the two guys.
Yeah.
That we can lose track of those other things. But more and more, I at least know, here in Los Angeles, we've had city council members in recent years who seem to actually care about this stuff.
Yep.
And have made it a big part of their platform. So I'm sure wherever folks live, you know.
No, there's stuff.
Or be that person if
That's true.
Yeah.
Run for office.
That sounds fun. If you have nothing else going on.
Yeah.
If you're looking to meet people, want to meet singles in your area, run for that. Well, that's all really helpful. I want to ask you a little bit more about what you all do.
Yes.
The Yellow Dot. Now, for those who maybe aren't super familiar, what's like the quick pitch?
Yes.
On what you're doing?
So Yellow Dot is a nonprofit climate media company, which basically we make videos and social clips and things like that to fight the disinformation of oil companies. That's the basic level. But yeah, we kind of make everything. We do these live shows in LA. We just started live comedy shows. But the idea is just to sort of help break through that narrative that has been pushed to us of the recycling is all you can do kind of thing. And just educating people a little bit more and also getting them kind of fired up, whether that's, laughing about things so that now they understand it, maybe getting a little angry because understanding what's actually going on behind the scenes and stuff. And so, we're just there to kind of elevate the conversation.
And is this something that's been a passion for you before this? Like, what's kind of been your journey of someone who obviously cares enough to work for an organization and a nonprofit at that?
I know. I know. No, I'll say this. Like, I'm very new to the climate space in many ways. I read David Wallace Wells' book, Uninhabitable Earth, in 2018 or whatever that was.
Great but terrifying book.
Yes, exactly. And that was the thing where I was like, oh my God, everything I thought I knew is not true, And so that was kind of my beginning of it. But then definitely working on Don't Look Up, that was a big piece of it because we had scientists there that were, obviously talking about the comet and things like that, but they were also climate scientists. We would talk about like what was actually going on and things like that. And so the making of Don't Look Up definitely like woke me up to a lot of things and kind of got me more excited about it. And then after the film, we did some sort of marketing with Netflix. We made these short videos that were like Jen Lawrence and Leonardo DiCaprio speaking to camera, and kind of connecting those dots of like talking about climate change and connecting it to the movie. Because a lot of people, like some people, they're like, they understood it was satire, but they maybe didn't totally get, okay, this is about climate change. And so we made a lot of those and we started to realize we're like, oh, there's in the short form space, you can make things quicker, you can get things out there, much faster. And also the world is changing so much that like things we'd be talking about with climate, all of a sudden we're like not relevant anymore. And we're like, oh, we have to like move faster. So making this short form stuff is important. And then also just making it fun. Not everything we do is comedy, but it's everything we do has some sort of entertainment to it, so that it's not just your boring PSA.
Yeah, that's great. So I have a question. This is slightly self-serving and a little open-ended, but someone that makes stuff, right, for the internet. There's this paradox that you can exist in where you want to make things that make people think. And I know our mission is kind of to try to like use stuff that people already know about to get them to think deeper and more critically about society. And like y'all, like while having fun, maybe having like a chuckle or a along the way. But there's this paradox of the main way we tend to distract ourselves from what's going on in the world is the consumption of content, right? We listen to our podcast obsessively, and we have to listen when we go to sleep because then the thoughts come in, or we are always watching a video in the background or streaming the show, and we should go to bed, but another episode starts. And not to act like that's intentionally insidious, but it can have that effect. Yeah. And sometimes then it feels like, well, how do we make stuff that is consumed in those same formats that doesn't just lead to the consumption cycle, but can like snap someone out of that such that they are thinking about the world outside of like content consumption?
Yeah,
so
totally.
Is that something you all think about?
Definitely, yeah.
Doing?
It is that thing where you're like, the easiest way, everyone has a phone, and the easiest way to people now is just content on their phone, right? Mm-hmm. And so like that was kind of our way in. But part of, so as I mentioned, we're doing these live shows, and part of what we've been doing is there are these monthly, we do them at Dynasty Typewriter, and there are these monthly live shows, and it's all comedy stuff, kind of variety show. But we also have like a climate scientist come on and talk for 10 minutes or whatever. And we realized after we did the first show, we were kind of like, oh, this is that feeling that you forget about when you are watching something home on your phone. Yeah. Is like that feeling of we're all in this together, we're all laughing at a certain thing, we're all connecting. And like I think also post-COVID, it's like this thing that people yearn for. And so we're definitely using that as a little bit more of a way in for people. And we're hoping to live stream it so that like everyone can see it, not just people in LA. But yeah, so I think that's a piece of it. But I will say you're right. It's hard. It's like the type of thing where you're making the thing that you're trying to get people in some ways to get away from, But I think it's just about kind of like having our hands in lots of different things, and like we've also do some live stunts and things like that we're a part of. And so it's the variety, I guess, that helps with it.
And then to be a little more specific on that as well, how do you approach using comedy especially to talk about things, right? Because I think sometimes comedy is the thing that distracts us from thinking about serious stuff. We turn on our favorite sitcom to not think about the terrible things happening in the world. Yeah. We know that recently a lot of comedy has gone into this weird space where it's like comedy that's not funny because it's really serious. Yeah. Not that the stories being told aren't good, but it's like, is this thing really funny? Yeah. So how do you all balance making stuff that is funny and uses like the tools of comedy to compel people while also getting them to think about stuff? Yeah.
It's funny. I wish we were that analytical about our comedy. Yeah. But we're not. Yeah. I think a lot of it comes from what we think is funny. And I've had people ask before, like, oh, why did you decide comedy was the way in? And it's like, the reason is because like, I don't know how else to think about it. Like I come from a background of like, I did improv in Chicago and stuff like that. And Adam, obviously the same thing, SNL and all that. And like, it's almost like the satire element is the way that I'm able to understand it and connect to it, because otherwise I get bored.
Okay, so it's about the same amount as 1 million Hiroshima bombs.
Punch.
So it's more about coming from like an emotional place of like, oh, this excites me and this is kind of what I want to do. But I will say, to your point about like the distraction thing, I think there's definitely some truth to that. But like, I also, if you look at like a show like Modern Family or something, definitely one of those distraction shows that like at the time is like, we're going to turn this on and this is the thing that's going to make me not think. But there's also the world where like you were watching a gay couple every week. Yeah. And it was just part of the family and we're all talking about whatever. And then like marriage equality passes. And I'm not saying that Modern Family made that happen. Yeah. I'm not the first person to talk about this, but like you look at Will and Grace or things like that, where like, it's about kind of like stepping it into our cultural zeitgeist. Yeah. And I think that's what we're taking away from it. Yeah.
A lot of like Midwestern uncles watching sitcoms shift their perspectives that way.
Absolutely. My Midwestern parents, it's like I think it's like not even thinking about it as a distraction, because it is, but also thinking about it as like being able to blend it into your life and see things in a different way that you might not understand if someone just told you, marriage equality should happen. Yeah. Right?
You used a word that's a trigger for me that I'm excited to talk about, a satire.
Oh, yeah.
It's a thing we've, like every 18 months we'll make a video on our channel that's like, can we still do satire? Is it dead? Is anyone still doing it? And I think it is hard because there's the discussion, I feel like for the past 5 or 10 years has been like, can we do satire anymore? Like post 2016, it was like, is satire dead? I think some of the work that you all have done and that your friend Adam has done seems like one of the last mainstream attempts to
Yeah.
create satirical work that aims at political and ecological ideas. So, I mean, how much do you, I guess, think about satire and what you're doing?
Yep.
And then are there sort of points of inspiration? Like examples of satirical, writing, filmmaking, comedy, whatever, that you all think about as inspiring what you're doing?
Yeah, well, I mean, I don't think satire is dead at all. Because I think, part of it is that you can say things in satire that you can't say other times. Like, one of the first things we did was this Chevron parody ad. And it's basically the images are, a beautiful field, a mother and her baby, a couple that's out like on bikes together. It's all the things that you see in those oil commercials. So very much on the surface, it looks like an oil commercial. And then the voiceover is, here at Chevron, we know that we're actively murdering you. We know that we're killing you. We know, it's like the entire thing is about how they're killing us.
We at Chevron straight up don't give a single about you, your weird children, or your stupid ratty ass dog.
If you were to just do a video where you just said, hey, everyone, you need to know that like oil companies do this and this is the emissions and this is what happens about, like, you start to tune out. And I think in satire, you can say like they're murdering us and they kind of are. So it's also truth. So, but I agree with you. It's a complicated vessel. Like I know even with Don't Look Up, we experienced that a little bit. It's like, do people understand what it's connecting to and all that sort of stuff? So I think it is a more challenging type of comedy to put out there. But I also think that if it hits, it delivers far more than just like a regular comedy.
Well, and then do you feel like there's a risk these days in making and producing things that do push back? Because I know that, I feel like more and more people are careful about who they upset and what they say. And we know that often to get stuff made, you are appealing to people that might not be like friends you used to do improv with, but people that went to business school and their friends, work in investment capital. So do you think that there's ever a risk, or do you all worry about, are we pissing off the wrong people here?
Yeah, I mean, we try not to worry about it too much, but we definitely piss off the wrong people. I mean, we do. It's like
or piss off the right people, I guess.
Yeah, that too. But we're a nonprofit company. It's hard, in the philanthropic world, people will be like, "Oh, you're being too angry or too mean." Like, so yes, we've experienced that. We also, our audience is more of like trying to shift people's perspective that are in the middle, like people that understand it's happening but don't understand how quickly climate change is happening. And so I think like with that, we know we have to ruffle the feathers a little. And I think it's like, hopefully in terms of the comedy world, we will kick back at some point. I don't think we're on this place where it's just going to become more and more where suddenly people aren't allowed to be funny anymore. I mean, I hope not. I think things have to get a little like, I don't want to say extreme, but like things have to kind of get pushed a little bit first before we can kind of come back from it. Yeah. So we don't really worry about it much, but it has definitely affected us. Like we have things come out of, you're doing this wrong. I mean, even when we first started putting videos out, we had climate groups that we'd meet with and they'd be like, you can't do that. Like the stuff you're doing, like it's too mean, or people aren't going to understand it and all this stuff. And we're like, okay, but we're doing it. There's other people that are doing exactly what you want them to do. We kind of all have to be doing this however we do it best. And so
when you reference the Chevron ad,
yes,
if I understand the genesis of this correctly, right?
Yes.
Something that happened kind of organically. It wasn't like there was a bunch of meetings about starting the thing and you pitched a bunch of things and the Chevron ad was the one that won out.
Yeah, no. This was Adam sent me a text one day and he was like, I wrote this funny voiceover for a fake Chevron ad. And then he just proceeded to write the text out all the way. And I was like, got this giant text. And I was like, cool, can I go make this? And he's like, sure. And so we got an editor and he pulled together a bunch of images and things like that. The lovely people over at Lost Planet. And we just cut it all together. And then we literally put it on Twitter one day. Like it was one of those things where I was like, he was like, when should we put this out? I was like, I don't know, Tuesday?
Yeah.
So we just like put it out and within an hour we had 1 million views. Overnight we had 5 million.
Yeah. It was a fun Twitter day.
And it was a fun Twitter day, but it was also one of those things where I was like, God, I wish we would have thought about this more because it had such a big impact. But then I was like, but we didn't say what to do after. We were just like, this is a funny video. Yeah. So that one had zero thought. But I think that kind of goes back to your point of like, sometimes when we think too much about impact and try and make everything perfect, it kind of deadens it. And so we try and stay away from that a little bit of like just really focusing on, is this a good idea? And then these other climate groups can take it to say, okay, this is for this action or this is for that.
And I know I've seen Adam in interviews describing what you do talk about anger
Yeah.
In a positive way. And I think the Chevron ad to me seems like one of those things that has a visceralness to it.
Yeah.
And talking about the companies are actively killing us, which is probably helpful in some instances because it can be easy to do the thinky thing.
Oh, yeah.
And I think we're all pretty good at knowing things and then forgetting that we know the things or not letting the knowledge have that emotional impact.
Yeah,
So
totally.
I do think starting from that place and letting people have, a sort of righteous anger and let people know that like it is okay, maybe. I'm not telling anyone how to feel, but it's maybe okay to be mad.
Yeah.
That there's a small set of corporate interests that are doing things that are having this potentially actually devastating effect on your life and your future children.
I want you to get up right now and go to the window, open it, and stick your head out and yell, "I'm as mad as hell, and I'm not going to take this anymore!"
Totally.
Yeah.
And I think it's also, it's even been like studies have shown that bringing people to an emotional place makes them more likely to act on climate. And so it's like, whatever your way in is, like, I love comedy, but like, that's not the only way. It's like also like making people angry, making them sad, like everyone has kind of their way in. And it's really that emotional piece that is the like catapult,
Yeah. So what is your hope or what do you see for Yellow Dot in the future? What are the things you're excited about doing, the things you'd want to do?
We are going to solve climate change single-handedly.
That's really great. And that's nice of you to do. Everyone else has been struggling.
No problem.
So,
I know. We're really good at it. No. No, I think, the general piece is like awareness. I even we've been around for a year now. And even just looking about how the climate conversation has changed within my own groups, but also like just in the world, how we're talking about it, like that is a victory for me. And I also think that just getting to a place where it can now be okay to talk about climate and it doesn't feel like, even like with celebrities and in a cultural space, like getting to that place where it is the thing that it's more about solving it opposed to us worrying about how we're talking about it, if that makes sense. But yeah, on the basic level though, it's just, we are really trying to, make people aware of what's going on and kind of fight back against the disinformation.
That's great. Final question for you.
Yeah.
If that's okay.
Love it.
I think, and this kind of gets back to some stuff we talked about earlier, but a big issue for all of this, and to talk about emotion even, is the motivating factor of hope. And I think sometimes when it comes to climate or other big political issues, when people don't have hope or cynicism gets so deep that they feel like nothing else is possible, that can lead to, apathy and inactivity. And it seems like having some sort of hope is really important as sort of a fuel or a renewable fuel in those activities. So what is something that gives you hope in the work that you're doing or kind of keeps you doing this stuff?
Yeah. It's hard. It's funny because like it is easy to just be like, oh my gosh, everything's a big mess or whatever. But also realizing like we have the solutions. Like there are, there's lots of clean energy companies doing things to make just that are, I don't want to say baby steps, but it's like you look at every year and you're like, oh, this thing has happened and this thing has happened. More and more of these, the Vermont thing was a huge thing. It made me realize, I was like, oh, if they can do it, little old Vermont, it's like more and more and that happens. And we have these fuel companies like really paying for this. That's where we hit them where it hurts is like money, right? And so I feel like the amount of progress that has happened even in the last year has really given me a lot of hope. And I think it's just kind of trucking along every day and still doing it because more and more people are excited to do something. They just don't know what. And so getting more and more people on board is like the thing that keeps me going.
Awesome. Well, thank you for sitting down and talking to us. Thanks to your whole team for helping make a video with us as well. And if anyone is here for the first time on this channel, please be sure you got to you got to subscribe, and please leave a comment. We would like to know what you think about this. If you think we said the wrong thing, tell us. If you have further thoughts on any of this, I'm sure people would like to see it. And again, if you did not check out the video that precedes this, where we kind of get into some larger questions about what's going on in terms of climate change, the oil industry, propaganda around it, what we could do, head over to Wisecrack and check that out. But thanks again. Thank you all for watching. And hey, have a little hope while you're at it, right?